To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in just 1 hour.
Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure, and starting our podcast as well, slightly differently from normal, but absolutely beautiful to really bring spring into the conversation from the offset. And I know that both myself and Alex have been really excited to have you on board supporting our podcast, Coaching Outdoors. We've both had the pleasure of hearing you speak at Henley Business School on your systemic team coaching. And I loved the way you started it. And one of the sentences which really caught my attention was about bringing the forgotten stakeholder nature into the room. But that's enough of how we've your work has caught both of our attention, and it would be amazing if you could just introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be with both of you, Alexandra and Anna Marie. Yeah, I'm Peter Hawkins. I'm sitting out on our lawns. I was hoping to be further away, but the signal won't allow me, where we live and look after 37 acres right on the edge of Bath in Somerset. And I've been involved with coaching since, I think my first coaching invoice was 1978. So probably about the time the two of you were born. And I've been increasingly over all those years looking at how do we move coaching beyond providing expensive personal development for the already highly privileged, making coaching a partnership where we're engaging with wider and wider stakeholders. What can coach and coachee do together that will benefit those that the coachee's life and work are in service of? And that, as you know from my writing, always needs to include the ecology, because the ecology is the most important stakeholder that we all share and all sentient beings share, and without whom no life would exist. So that's just a little background on myself and where I'm coming from.
And it's wonderful to hear you say that, because our listeners will know that Anna Marie and I both have a huge affinity to nature and ecology, and which is why we do what we do as well. And we always ask our guests on our podcast just to share with us what is their earliest memory of being outdoors or being with nature. What's the sort of earliest memory that you can think of being outdoors and in nature?
Oh, I can remember going for a walk in the heat wave of 1953, which was, I think, an early forewarning of global warming. I just remember being with my father and it being too hot to hold his hand. But although we lived on the edge of London, I grew up at a time where we still had hot milk straight from the cows, delivered by horse and cart to our door. And that was only 20 miles from the centre of London. So I do have that sense of being able to look out of also my childhood bedroom at fields beyond the edge of the urban centre. We were right on the edge of Hayes in Middlesex, if you know where that is. And there's no countryside left there now.
And thank you for giving kind of that brief insight, and actually just a real stark reminder how within, a couple of generations, that within the UK, things have changed so much. The pace of change, the way the impact on the environment has been absolutely huge. And with that kind of backdrop, it would just be really interesting to kind of loop into your coaching and how that has emerged kind of in parallel. And I know very much you talk about your eco-participatory awakening and how that's kind of been a patchwork and how you've been kind of pulling all of that together. So it would just be great to have an insight into how these various pieces kind of fit together.
So I'm doing this book currently with the three founders of Climate Coaching Alliance, Eve Turner and Josie McLean and Alison Wybrow, and also with David Drake in America, and Josie's in Australia, and Zoe Cohen. And we're each writing about our awakening. And I realize mine's probably been, because I'm the eldest, the longest journey. And that whole notion of how do I bring my intellectual awakening? So I was reading stuff about ecological devastation way back in the late 60s, early 70s, people like Rachel Carson and Gregory Bates. And I was reading Resurgence magazine since it started. That must be sort of early 70s. And Donna Meadows and Limits to Growth. And that really affected me intellectually. But then, you know, I think that's just one bit of the work. Then there is how do you move it from cognitive neo-cortex understanding to really getting it in an embodied, in a spiritual and an intuitive and an emotional way. And you know, we were exploring in the 1980s, 1990s, how do we bring systemic approaches and sustainability into organizations, working with, you know, so many really rich and very, very groundbreaking colleagues. But bringing together the kind of the practical learning, the intellectual learning, the spiritual learning, and the emotional learning. I described in that piece I've written for that book as the patches that had to become a patchwork quilt, and then realizing that actually I can't be the one who sews those patches together. You know, it's not me that has to make my integration. I have to do that as part of and ask for help from the wider world to integrate me. The integration of me comes through the world, and the relationship with the rest of the world isn't something that's just self-generated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really it's wonderful for us to hear, and I'm sure our listeners will be loving this as well, because it's coming from such a deep-rooted and deeply thought-out process in your own mind. You've really thought about yourself and your connection and the system which we are in, and how nature's obviously been there a lot longer than we as human beings have been, and a lot longer than coaching has been. And it's you wrote an article that you published last year called "Let the Wider Ecology Do the Coaching," and it was published last November. And I absolutely loved reading it, because you mentioned about the fact that, you know, it's good for us to let nature do the coaching, because it's been doing coaching and learning and development and everything for us for longer than we've ever been thinking about the coaching aspect of being outdoors. And one of the things you mentioned in that article is about the concern around ecology becoming another it, as you call it. So maybe another problem to solve, or another global agenda item that needs to be addressed or needs to be fixed. And you ask, you know, people to think about guarding against that from happening. What can we do, or how can we work around that and prevent ecology becoming just another it, another agenda item, or another thing that we need to talk about?
Yes, and of course the ecology doesn't become an it. We just conceptualize it as an it. Mm-hmm. We make it other. We talk about the environment as something that is outside humans, and I do so many talks where people say that, you know, it's not, you know, I get these questions. It's not our job to bring the ecology into the coaching room, someone said to me. Got very cross. And I said, well, that's a very interesting way of thinking, I said, let me ask you one question. Do your coachees breathe? Do they eat? He said, well, of course they do. And I said, well, then the ecology is already inside the coaching room. You're just not paying attention to the ecology or the ecological dimension. And we often think of, you know, people ask me, well, how do we bring it into the coaching? Well, it's already there, right? The ecology is not something that we're embedded in alone. It is embedded in us. And I think that notion of what I call double nesting, nested systemic levels, all the levels we are nested within are also nested within us. So in my radical days now, I say there's no such thing as individual coaching, right? Because there may just be two people in the room, but even that means it's not individual coaching, because the coaching isn't done by the coach, it's done by the coach, the coachee, and life's agenda. And so when the individual comes into the room, that the team dynamic comes into the room because it's inside them. The organizational culture isn't something out there, it's inside them. The ecology isn't something out there, it's inside them. So we're coaching through the individual, we're coaching a team dynamic, an organizational culture, and the ecology. And the ecology is also doing the coaching. And so somewhere we have to look at how our whole language and our whole way of being creates splitting and separation and othering. And we other all that's around us, and it's part of us. We make other.
And thank you for giving a real concise kind of overview of, okay, so the ecology and others, how do we position ourselves within nature? And actually we can't escape it, we're a part of it ultimately. And what we love to do for our listeners is to kind of make it tangible, so they can kind of take something away, some kind of practice that they can integrate. And having read your article, which we'll be including in the show notes on our website with this episode, it would be great to have an insight into some of the practices that you've been experimenting with some of your colleagues that really kind of illustrate what this is all about.
Right, and I love the cries that I'm trying to work out what sort of bird it is that I can hear from one of your places. It's either it sounds like a crow, but it may not be. If we talk about practices, I think the first is to be able to walk with people in a way that we can attend to ourselves and attend to the world that is in us and around us. And that double listening, that being able to listen at multiple levels is such an important, you better walk barefoot through the grass and become aware of yourself and the grass at the same time. That kind of multi-systemic lens attending is, I think, just a very simple starting place. But let me just share another couple of practices. I think you know I hold every year here at Barrow Castle 3-day retreat, advanced retreats for coaches and consultants. And we have got a whole old woodland and a new woodland that we planted in 2005. And we do a lot of the work in pairs walking through the woodland. And one of the practices I get people to really deepen is ability to listen by walking alongside. Because when you walk alongside the other person, you have to go into their rhythm of walking. You have to go into their rhythm of breathing. You have to pause with them and move with them. So your body gets into sync, a little like if you're riding a horse. And the other next practice, once people have really got into being able to listen by not being face to face but shoulder to shoulder, is to be able to let your body do that listening, Well, you also notice what's immediately in front of you, the first time horizon, how the path is opening up in front of you and turning bends and changing direction. And then also to raise your eyes and see the horizon. Because one of the practices that's so important for all leaders today is to be able to manage multiple time horizons and distance horizons and perspective horizons at the same time. And I think one of the first things we need to do is to coaches to be able to manage the immediate, to be able to see how the path is unfolding in front of you, what needs to be innovated for tomorrow, and future foresight. And I think it's very hard to do that indoors. You know, we can do it on flip charts, but paths, particularly where we've got like you have, Alexandra, or we have here, you've got deep valleys and high hills. You can really do that moving through and holding different horizons in mind at the same time.
And it's such a lovely way you describe it. I mean, we've had a couple of people talk about metaphor in being able to be coached outdoors, and you just described the wonderful way of using the environment around for being able to see that near future, the long-term future, and position it in a, as you said, in a way that it's just would be very hard to do indoors. In a way that, I mean, the outdoors just affords a little bit more ability to do that. And I love as well that you talked about side by side and the synchronicity element of it. And I have to say, when I did my master's dissertation last year, I actually referenced you and quoted one of your books on some of the comments you'd made on synchronicity and side-by-side walking, because I did my dissertation on the benefits of outdoor coaching, and it is something that has come up for other people as well. And I think that side-by-side nature of being outdoors, whether you're walking or sitting or however you might be, again adds an element that you don't necessarily get indoors. And it would be really interesting. Sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, Alexandra, can I just make a comment on metaphor?
Mm-hmm.
Gregory Bateson had this joke come pun, which was, Robert Browning wrote a line, "A man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for?" Bateson changed it to a person's reach must exceed their grasp, or what's a metaphor? That actually the word metaphor, he's playing with the notion that how do we see the meta we are part of? How do we see ourselves as just a very small microcosm within a greater meta? But the important thing is we often talk about nature as metaphor, and I worry that we can, if you like, raid nature for kind of intellectual metaphors. And how do we have the metaphor of nature speak to us more directly than via kind of analytic, cognitive comparison? So I'm very interested in embodied metaphor. Yeah, how do we have not the path as a metaphor, but an embodied experience of, we can feel simultaneously the path of the woodland and the path of our life. We can feel the flow of the river. John Donahue said, to live our lives as a river flows, always discovering its new emergence. It's not quite an accurate quote, but how do we have embodied metaphors that speak to us before we even understand them?
And being willing to listen and ready to listen to those, to nature talking to us in that way, I would say as well.
And to listen with our bodies first and our intuition second, and our left hemisphere neocortex third or last.
Oh, this is absolutely wonderful, Peter. I mean, you're bringing in so many different aspects here, and we always say what everybody we've spoken to has come at this topic from such a different angle and such a different viewpoint, and has given us such different insights, that you know, our listeners, every time they listen to a new podcast, there's just so much more to learn, and Anna Marie and I are learning so much as we go through this as well. And it would be really interesting actually to get your view then on what the challenges are around the approach to being outside, being around, you know, being surrounded by this ecology, trying to tune ourselves in, trying to enable ourselves to listen. What are the challenges that we might face, both as coaches and maybe the coachee as well?
Well, I also want to kind of expand the notion of coaching outdoors, which is, if we are having to coach inside an office or on Zoom, how do we get the outdoors indoors? Yeah, so I think, you know, I've done so many Zoom talks and webinars since COVID began, and I made a commitment that I would always have fresh flowers or fresh growth from our gardens behind me on the Zoom camera, right? I will often, in the midst of a session, I will turn my camera so it's facing out of the window, and is kind of, let me just show you, is looking at this. Oh, it's not too much into the sun.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
See that view?
Yes, we can see that. It's beautiful.
See that without losing. And I'll ask them to turn their camera and show me what they are seeing from their window. So I think there is something about how do we break the separation of outdoors and indoors. You know, I think I wanted to kind of bring that element in, so we don't just see coaching outdoors as something we do when we're outdoors. That's not a contradiction in terms, but you know, I think some of the challenges are, we've got to, I think as coaches, this is why we do the advanced retreats, we have to practice things like walking meditation. We have to practice what I was saying earlier, multi-level listening through the body and through the intuition, to get ourselves comfortable. Because one of the things I often say is clients will be very trusting of you if they really sense from all of you that what you're doing because not just to be clever, but you're doing it in service of a purpose they are part of, and that you are comfortable with it. So I think the first barrier is for us to get comfortable as a learner outside, learning from the woodland, learning from. Otherwise, I think the danger is we just do indoor coaching, right? And raid nature for a nice context.
And just to offer our listeners, you know, anything else. And I love the way you kind of summarize that kind of raiding nature in a way to kind of like support our coaching. It's brought up like this image of me, you know, we have our coaching toolkit, and, you know, what skills and theories and models can we draw from that? And like, oh, nature's another one, let's pop it in, kind of thing. And actually, you know, how can we move beyond that? How can we shift beyond that? How can we really kind of be, you know, a participant? And, you know, anything kind of just practical to pull it together, just as a final takeaway for our listeners would be amazing.
So, and I've stood up just so that I can stretch my body, and I think the sun's gone in, so I can actually turn around and get a bit more of the countryside in. Except you won't see me well then. I think what's important almost is that we start coaching outdoors, indoors. Yeah, and only when we've got a sense of the ecology, the wider system has become a partner with us in the process. Yeah, that it is doing. It's like, I think it's really important that it becomes another thing we raid the ecology for when it's our coaching toolkit, rather than we stop thinking that the coach does the coaching. we start to realize that the coach and the coachee partner together to let life do the coaching. Yeah. So I think when we do that, we've got to then try and find a linkage between what's opening up and what's life bringing to that coachee and what's nature around us bringing to us. And how can we make the connection between those two worlds, rather than see it as another part of the coach's toolkit. You know, I think it's something about how we privilege. You know, I'm a radical who says I'm not interested in being on the client's agenda or the coach's agenda. I'm interested in how quickly we can get to the learning edge where we haven't got the answer, they don't have the answer, but life's requiring us to find an answer. And that's the interesting place. And I think if we could be focused on that, and then together be asking, so how can the wider system support our exploration there, then at least we're starting in the right place.
And that just takes it so beyond, I think, people's initial thoughts of outdoor, like you said, simple outdoor coaching, which you could basically be having indoor coaching just in an outdoor environment. I think that's going to give everybody, it certainly gives me a lot to really think about. And I love your idea of bringing the outdoors indoors, even if you are indoors, and having flowers in the background. I have a bit of an obsession with succulents and cacti, and I've got them all over my office, so that if, you know, the same thing wherever I am, there's some sort of plant life or in the background as well. So I think that's something from a biophilia perspective that people can really work on as well, in terms of, if you do have to be indoors, how can you connect with ecology even indoors? As you said, it's all around us. It's both indoors and outdoors. Now you've mentioned and you've provided so many quotes, and I'm going to actually, whenever we release a podcast, we have a resources page on our website, and we provide resources for people to go and read that our podcast guests have suggested. And I'm going to do a little bit of research as well and see if I can find some of those quotes you've given as, oh no, we've lost him.
We can also have a bit of the outdoors.
Yeah.
So this is great for any of our people, our guests who are, our listeners who are watching this. You'll see that Peter has changed locations, and he's actually demonstrating the what he's just been mentioning about having the outdoors indoors, and having a beautiful set of daffodils in the background there, absolutely beautiful spring flowers. So yeah, so what I was just saying though, Peter, is that we always share the resources that our podcast guests suggest, but because you provided us with some wonderful quotes as well, I'm going to see if I can dig those out as well and find those and get those quotes for people, because I have a feeling people might ask us who where those quotes are from as well. So thank you for providing us with a range of things for our listeners to look at and read. Are there any other resources or anything that you might point our listeners towards in terms of either reading or watching or listening to?
I'll also send you a poem that I wrote just recently, inspired by one of the best books I've read this year, which is called Braiding Sweetgrass, the book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Beautiful, beautiful book. Robin is her ancestry is First Nations American, and she became a very distinguished botany professor, and she was also a single mother of 2 young girls, and she brings these three worlds together in a beautiful way of indigenous wisdom, Native American indigenous wisdom, the understanding of botany and ecology, and being a mother. And so one of the lines from that, which I absolutely was so touched by, she says, we have to constantly remember that we are the youngest child of creation. And we need to be able to ask for all those aspects of creation that have been here much, much longer than we have, what we need to learn. And so the poem I'll share with you, and you can put it on the resources, is really very much from that position. You know, how do we start with that humility? It's that if we're going to partner with ecology, we have to do so as the junior partner, not as somebody who's asking the ecology to assist us. And I think it's that I wanted to kind of really bring out today, really. And I'll leave you with just one other practice, because when I've done talks on let the ecology do the coaching elsewhere, the practice that people have really found most helpful is one that came from my work training interfaith celebrants to do weddings and funerals and child blessings and house blessings. And what I used to train celebrants and people doing rites of passage to do was to before they start a session, to open the 7 levels within them. And this is the notion that the ecology is in us. We don't have to just go out there to find it. We can find it in here. And so in opening the 7 levels, before you start a session, you start by making sure you're grounded to the earth, with your feet, your spine's upright. You've got that sense of connecting heaven and earth. You've got the sense of being able to embrace this way. And then in your imagination, you hold an image of the person you're about to coach. That's level 1. And you just try and really bring them as vividly to mind as possible. So the relationship is starting before they arrive. Then you hold your sense of what happens in the connection between myself and them, the relational world. And then you think about their immediate human system. Who do they lead? Who are their colleagues? Who do they report to? Who are their family? The immediate gathered community. And the 4th level you open is who is beyond the immediate community? Who are those not invited to the party? Who are the people they're not noticing? So if we're thinking about a wedding, we think about, you know, ex-partners, people not invited, people who've died recently. How do we extend beyond the usual boundary? And then level 5, we expand that out to the whole human global family. How do we hold in awareness the 7.7 billion people on this planet? The 8th level, we hold the more than human world of all sentient beings. And then finally, we hold, however you want to imagine it, the mystery of oneness. And once we've opened all those levels, we bring them all back down again. And what I'd love your listeners to experiment with, and if they do, I'd love to hear from them, is just experiment with doing that practice. It's in the article, with half of your coachees and not the other half, and see what difference it makes to what they bring to the coaching session. Because I believe if we can shift our consciousness here, what gets brought is different, because somewhere the coachees are waiting for us to open up the container for them to be able to share those aspects. So let me offer you that practice as well. Now finishing.
Thank you so much for that. It really just does bring it back to our awareness and giving ourselves permission, and where do we focus our attention, and then inviting, seeing what emerges, and just it's all about that space. And that's for me what's resonated through that our conversation. It's kind of the presence and the holding the space and connection. And I know our listeners would love to find out.
Sorry, Anna-Marie, not only holding the space, but being held by the space. You know, otherwise, again, we feel we as coach are holding the space rather than actually realizing we are infinitely resourced every moment of every day, if we can feel ourselves being held, and that actually the wider systemic levels beyond us are holding us and the coaching. Not we're doing it as coaches.
Yeah. What can we do? So it would be great just to know where our listeners can find you, and if you could signpost where that would be, and if you've got anything kind of coming up, it would be great to know about that as well.
So renewalassociates.co.uk is my website, and there's lots of videos and books and everything referenced on there, and regular blogs. They can join me on LinkedIn, and the next we were going to have an advanced coaching retreat in June, but because of COVID still being unsure, it won't happen now until the next one, which is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd of September. So if the two of you want to come, you'd be very welcome. Come and play. And the other thing that you might, we have a website for this place, barrowcastle.co.uk. And on there you might see we have another ecological bit of coaching support, because we have built an Enneagram herb garden. So for those readers who are into the Enneagram and Enneagram coaching, this is a way of doing the Enneagram discovery in nature, out of doors, through the body. So there's a little thing for people to go away and discover.
No, that's definitely something different. I've never heard of anything like that before. It's definitely unique. So Peter, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing your wisdom. It's been an absolute treat for myself, and I'm sure for Alex and our listeners as well. We've been really, really very honoured that you've managed to find time in your schedule to fit us in on Coaching Outdoors.
I think what you're both doing is really important, and I wanted to support it, and it's lovely to see you both again, having seen you on the Masters programme at Henley. So I wish you well with taking this work you're doing to not only keeping it going, but taking it to the next level.
It started out as a project, and we're just astounded by how much we're learning. It's like having, personal CPD for us, and we're just getting an insight into so many kind of amazing practitioners from around the world. And yeah, who knows where it will be leading? But no, we'll keep you in the loop.
And do encourage everyone also to join climatecoachingalliance.org, because that's really important. It's now up to about 1,000 members worldwide, and that's exploring, what can coaching contribute to the great challenge of our time.
So I'd just like to say a big thank you once again, and to remind our listeners that they can find all the resources and everything through our website, www.coaching-outdoors.com, and we've also got a back catalogue of a massive array of different coach practitioners and experts, so be sure to check that out too.